He was the richest man in Rome, Marcus Licinius Crassus, so wealthy, he once claimed he could fund the entire Roman army from his own pocket. He bought cities like others bought bread. But greed is a hungry god. It's never satisfied. So Crassus set out to buy the one thing he didn't yet have: eternal glory. His target? The Parthian Empire. But what awaited him was not honor. It was betrayal, fire, and molten gold. This is the true, brutal story of how the wealthiest man in history was brought to his knees, and how his thirst for gold led to a death so horrifying it still echoes through the ages. Marcus Licinius Crassus was not born into greatness, but into potential. He watched as his father, a respected general, fell from grace during the chaotic days of the Marian Synod purges. While others fled Rome or died resisting, young Crassus learned to adapt. He escaped to Hispania, bided his time, and returned not with legions, but with ambition sharper than any blade. He saw opportunity not in war, but in the aftermath of it. And when Sulla seized control of Rome and initiated his infamous proscriptions, those brutal lists of enemies of the state, Crassus moved like a vulture through a battlefield. He began buying the properties of the condemned, often for mere fractions of their value. Villas, farmland, entire city blocks were transferred into his name as their previous owners were executed or exiled. He didn't just build wealth, he built a monopoly on suffering. Then came the fires. Rome was a tinderbox, and when flames devoured districts, Crassus would arrive with his private team of 500 slaves trained as builders and architects. But he didn't offer free aid. He offered a deal. Sell him the smoldering ruins, and he would rebuild. Refuse, and he would let it burn. With every fire, his empire expanded. Money became his god, and Rome his altar. Yet for all his riches, for all the land, slaves, and influence he amassed, Crassus felt overshadowed. Julius Caesar was a rising star in politics, brilliant and charismatic. Pompey the Great had conquered in the East, earning triumphs and cheers. Crassus was powerful, but ridiculed. He lacked military prestige. His one major command, the defeat of Spartacus, had been tainted when Pompey swooped in at the last moment, stealing the credit. Crassus seethed. He didn't just want to be rich, he wanted to be immortalized, to go down in Roman history as a conqueror. He joined Caesar and Pompey in the first triumvirate, but it was clear, Crassus was third among equals, tolerated, not admired. So when the idea came to invade Parthia, he seized it like a drowning man grasping for air. Parthia was a wealthy empire stretching from the Euphrates to the Iranian plateau. Its riches were legendary. But Rome had no immediate conflict with them. No slight, no threat. The Senate had not authorized a campaign. Crassus didn't care. He saw Parthia as the golden gate to eternal fame. He would conquer them, claim their treasuries, and finally become Rome's military equal to Caesar and Pompey. He leveraged his power and financed the campaign with his own funds. He raised 7 legions, some 40,000 men, and prepared to march into the east. From the start, the omens were grim. A tribune publicly cursed the campaign, flinging holy entrails at Crassus and screaming that he was marching to his death. The crowds in Rome did not cheer, they jeered. Even Crassus' own officers were uneasy. But the old man, now in his 60s, pressed forward with determination bordering on delusion. He rejected sound advice. He dismissed envoys offering guidance. One such offer came from King Artavasdes of Armenia, who offered a safer mountain route and troops to assist. Crassus ignored him, believing the flat Mesopotamian plains would be quicker and easier. He wanted victory, and he wanted it fast. It was a fatal decision. The Parthians, meanwhile, were not oblivious to the Roman invasion. General Surena, a brilliant and cunning commander, prepared to meet Crassus not with brute force, but with strategic genius. His army, composed mostly of light cavalry and devastating horse archers, was perfectly suited for the terrain. Unlike the slow, rigid Roman infantry, the Parthian cavalry could move, strike, and vanish into the sands. They brought with them thousands of arrows and a terrifying tactic, the Parthian shot, firing backward while retreating on horseback. It was more than a trick. It was psychological warfare. When the two forces finally met near the town of Carrhae, the trap was already set. Crassus, relying on outdated maps and misinformation, had no idea what he was walking into. He had no cavalry to match Surina's mobility. His troops were exhausted from desert marches. The sun was unrelenting. And still, Crassus pushed forward. He was offered another chance to negotiate, a final warning from the Parthians, but he interpreted it as weakness. He ordered his legions into battle formation. What followed was not a battle, it was a massacre. The Parthians did not charge. They surrounded the Roman square formations and unleashed a relentless storm of arrows. These were not simple projectiles. The Parthian bows were composite, with double the range of Roman archers. Their arrows could pierce armor and shields. For hours, the Romans stood packed in tight formations, sweltering in their metal, helpless against the invisible death from afar. When their shields splintered, they died. When they broke formation to chase the archers, they were isolated and cut down. The sound of screaming horses and whistling arrows filled the air. Blood soaked the sand. Crassus, watching his legions dissolve into chaos, still believed he could turn it around. He ordered his son, Publius Crassus, to lead the cavalry in a desperate charge. Young, brave, and loyal, Publius obeyed. He took 1,300 cavalrymen and dashed toward what he thought was the Parthian rear. But Surina had predicted this. Publius was lured deep into the desert, isolated, encircled. The Parthians dismembered his forces, overwhelmed him, and then they cut off his head. As the day faded, the Parthians returned to the main battle, and they brought a trophy. On a long spear, they had impaled Publius' severed head. They rode past the Roman lines, holding it high, shouting in mockery. The morale of the Roman army shattered. Fathers wept, brothers trembled, and Crassus, his eyes red with grief, could only stare in horror. His son was dead, his army was dying, and his dream of eternal glory had already begun to rot. Night fell over the blood-soaked plain of Carrhae, but the silence it brought was anything but peaceful. Crassus, surrounded by the remnants of his shattered army, stood paralyzed by the weight of his choices. Around him, the groans of the wounded echoed like a dirge. Thousands of Romans lay dead, pierced by arrows or trampled in the chaos. The survivors huddled together, clutching their shields, praying to indifferent gods. A chill crept into the desert air, and with it came the realization they were trapped. No water, no reinforcements, no hope. And somewhere out in the darkness, the Parthians waited, watching like wolves. Crassus had once commanded legions with iron authority. Now, he looked like a man haunted by ghosts. He barely spoke. His face, once full of confidence and ego, was slack with grief and disbelief. Publius was gone. His son, his legacy, cut down and paraded like a trophy. Crassus had not even recovered the body. The proud general was reduced to a desperate father and a failed conqueror. His officers argued among themselves. Some urged him to retreat immediately under cover of darkness. Others wanted to negotiate. A few even whispered of abandoning the wounded. Discipline eroded as fast as morale. That night, in the flickering torchlight, Crassus agreed to a withdrawal. They would attempt to flee under cover of darkness and reach the nearby city of Carrhae, where a Roman garrison awaited. It was their last hope. The retreat began quietly, but it was clumsy and slow. Men stumbled through the sand, dragging the wounded, leaving behind the dead. Along the way, several units got separated. Some vanished into the night, never seen again. The Parthians, ever patient, followed silently. They didn't attack immediately. They let the Romans exhaust themselves. They wanted them broken. By dawn, the ragged remnants reached Carrhae. The city offered brief respite, but not safety. Surina had encircled the area. The Parthians controlled the water, the terrain, and the escape routes. Crassus, trapped, sent desperate messages to King Artavasdes of Armenia for help, but none would come. It was here that Surina offered a deceptive kindness. He sent envoys to propose a peace treaty. Crassus could negotiate safe passage for himself and his men if he would meet personally to discuss terms. The offer was laced with civility. A trickle of hope returned to the Romans. Some officers rejoiced, believing salvation was near. Crassus remained uneasy. His instincts told him it was a trap, but pressure mounted. The soldiers were on the edge of mutiny. They had followed Crassus into hell and saw nothing but death at the end of it. Now they demanded peace. The officers surrounded Crassus, urging him to go, to at least pretend to negotiate. He could no longer lead, only comply. And so, reluctantly, with only a few men, he left the safety of Carrhae and met Serena's delegation outside the gates. At first, the meeting was formal. Parthian nobles, adorned in silk and bronze, greeted the Romans with smiles that didn't reach their eyes. Crassus, weathered and bitter, tried to maintain a facade of dignity. They spoke of terms, of surrender, of returning to Roman lands. But the atmosphere turned tense. One of the Parthians grabbed Crassus' bridle, pulling him closer. Another accused him of not speaking truthfully. Voices rose. A Roman drew his sword. In an instant, the fragile truce dissolved into chaos. Accounts differ on what exactly happened next, but the result was the same. Marcus Licinius Crassus, the richest man in Roman history, was killed. Some say he was stabbed in the heart during the scuffle. Others claim he was captured and later executed. One version tells of him being forced to kneel before Serena, only to have molten gold poured down his throat as a symbol of his insatiable greed. What's certain is that Crassus died not as a general in battle, but as a broken man betrayed by his own ambition. But the Parthians were not done. Crassus' severed head and hand were taken as trophies, paraded before Serena's army. They would later be sent to the Parthian court as symbols of victory. Some sources say his head was used as a prop in a Greek play staged for King Oroda II. As actors performed a tragedy about Dionysus, the god of wine and wealth, Crassus' head was brought on stage to represent a decapitated character. Laughter roared through the royal court. It was more than a humiliation. It was a mockery of Roman pride. The Roman army, now leaderless and terrified, surrendered in chunks. Thousands were taken prisoner. Many would be marched east, far from Roman lands, their fates unknown. Some would serve as slave soldiers in Parthian borderlands. Others simply vanished into history. Carrhae became a name of shame in Roman annals, a disaster on the scale of Cannae, but far more humiliating. For this was not just a military defeat. It was the complete destruction of a man who had once held the Republic in his palm. Back in Rome, the news of Crassus' death arrived like a storm. The balance of power shattered. The first triumvirate, already strained, crumbled. Pompey and Caesar turned on each other, no longer bound by their reluctant third partner. Civil war loomed, and the Senate, once wary of Crassus' ambition, now had a new fear, the growing shadow of Caesar. Crassus, who had spent his life hoarding wealth and climbing the social ladder, achieved the immortality he craved, but not in the way he imagined. He became a cautionary tale, a man who possessed everything, yet died with nothing. His golden fortune could not buy loyalty. His influence could not secure victory. And in the end, the gold he worshipped was weaponized against him. His name would be remembered, not as a statesman or a warrior, but as a symbol of unchecked greed, of blind ambition, and of the terrible price one pays when wealth becomes more important than wisdom.